Hi everyone. I grew up in the most ordinary neighborhood, in the most ordinary house with a white painted fence that my father threatened to repaint every spring, but never got around to until July. My father, James Thompson, worked as a warehouse manager for auto parts. My mother, Sarah, was a nurse at the municipal hospital. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. There was never any extra money. We often spent vacations working in Grandma's garden on the outskirts of town, and a new car was an event discussed at dinner for weeks. I went to a regular school. I wasn't a star student, but I wasn't a failure either. I had one quirk. I was always drawn to computers. Not to play games, but to understand how they worked. By high school, I could reinstall Windows with my eyes closed and knew what an IP address was. When it was time to apply for college, I told my parents I wanted to try IT security. My father just grunted, "A computer guy, huh? Well, look, Mikey, they say it's a promising field." The problem was money. Tuition at a decent college cost money. Not an astronomical amount, but significant for our family. I saw my mother start saving from every paycheck, saw my father take on extra shifts at the warehouse. I felt ashamed. I felt like a burden. So, that evening when I got my acceptance letter, I told them, I'll pay for my studies myself. Or rather, I'll earn it. Just help me with the first deposit for the dorm, and I'll manage from there. My father gave me a long look. He had that kind of look, heavy but warm, if you know what I mean. He didn't say anything, just clapped me on the shoulder. And my mother started crying. She always cried when she was proud. College turned out to be nothing like in the movies. No parties or casual student romances. I had a schedule, scheduled down to the minute. During the day, lectures and labs. Evenings and nights, part-time jobs. At first, I delivered pizzas. An old, beat-up Honda that coughed at every intersection, and bags that always smelled. Then I got a job at a coffee shop near campus, washing dishes. The most disgusting job on earth. Greasy water, mountains of plates, and an ever-yelling Mexican cook demanding I work faster. But the real luck came from an unexpected place. One day at the coffee shop, an elderly woman approached me. Elegant, gray-haired, with a cane, but with such a straight back, as if she'd swallowed a poker. Her name was Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood. She lived in an old two-story house 3 blocks from the college, in a neighborhood that was once considered prestigious but was now just quietly living out its days. "Young man," she asked, looking at me over her glasses. "Are you always so focused while scrubbing that pot? You have the face of a thinker." I was embarrassed. She offered me a job. Simple. Come to her in the morning, help with breakfast, bring groceries, check if everything was all right. She paid a little, but steadily. The main thing was, it was early in the morning. I agreed, and that decision nearly cost me my diploma. I woke up at 5 in the morning. In winter, when it was dark and cold, it was sheer torture. I'd pull on 2 sweaters, grab my bike, and race to Mrs. Blackwood's house. She had a huge old house, full of books, paintings in heavy frames, and the smell of mothballs and dried apples. She woke up early. I'd enter the house, I had my own key, quietly clatter around in the kitchen. Mrs. Blackwood loved oatmeal cooked with milk, in a special way, not too runny, not too thick, and always with a pinch of cinnamon, but not ground, a stick that you had to hold in the milk. She only drank tea from a porcelain cup with forget-me-nots. Breakfast had to be served exactly at 6:30. While the oatmeal cooked, I'd water the plants on the windowsills. There were about 20, and each required its own approach. Then I'd run to the pharmacy for her medications if they were running low. Then check the mail. Then make sure the pipes in the basement hadn't burst. I did all of this on autopilot, fighting off sleep. And I often overslept. "Mr. Thompson," she'd say in her creaky but mocking voice, as I rushed into the kitchen with the pot. "You're 5 minutes late again today. The oatmeal seems to have sat a little too long. But you're young, I'll forgive you this oversight." I'd smile, apologize, and race off to college. And I was almost always late for my first class. Professor Williams, who taught fundamentals of algorithm design, couldn't stand it. He was a dry, pedantic man with a perpetually dissatisfied face. "Mr. Thompson," he'd sneer through his teeth as I tiptoed to the back row. "Do you, apparently, operate under separate, special laws of spacetime? Or maybe you just don't care, allowing yourself to burst into the auditorium mid-lecture, distracting the other students?" "Sorry, Professor Williams," I'd answer, avoiding his eyes. "It just happened. Won't happen again. You say that every week. Perhaps you'd like to share the reason? What is so important happening in your mornings that it's more important than an education your parents, by the way, are paying for? I was silent. I couldn't tell him about Mrs. Blackwood. It was too personal, if you will. It just didn't fit the format of a student excuse. It was easier to be known as a slacker than to explain that I was someone's personal caretaker and cook. I didn't need pity. I just needed to make it to the end of the semester. Professor Williams would shake his head and mark me down for attendance. But during exams, I gave it my all. I couldn't afford to fail. I'd sit up nights, gulping liters of cheap coffee, dissecting algorithms and code until my fingers started to cramp. When I got the highest score in his subject, Professor Williams looked at me with genuine surprise. He turned my grade book over in his hands for a long time, then looked up at me. "Thompson, I must admit, I don't understand you. You're a highly capable young man, one of the best in the group. But your behavior, this chronic unreliability, it spoils the whole picture." I just shrugged. "I'm managing, sir." He didn't ask any more questions. But from then on, he stopped nagging me about being late. He probably decided I was some kind of genius with autistic traits, for whom quirks were forgivable. And Mrs. Blackwood, we grew closer. I learned that she was a widow. Her husband had been a literature professor at the same college I attended. Her children lived somewhere in California, visiting once a year, at Christmas. She often spoke of them with slight sadness, but without resentment. She was from the old school, proud. "They have their own lives, Michael. I don't want to be a burden to them." I didn't just bring her breakfast. Sometimes, if I had time, we'd have tea together. She'd tell me about books, about music, about how she danced at her prom in 1952. She'd listen to my stories about lectures, about Professor Williams nagging me. She'd laugh. "Michael," she said one day, "you're a very good boy. Your mother raised a worthy man. You know what your strength is? What, Mrs. Blackwood? You don't look for easy paths and you don't complain. You just do what you have to do. That's a rare quality. Remember it. It will carry you through." I remembered. Back then, I thought she was talking about my studies. I was wrong. She was talking about life. The last year of college was hell. My thesis project on intrusion detection systems, working at the coffee shop, Mrs. Blackwood in the mornings, and occasional gigs at the student IT help desk where I fixed printers and helped professors set up their email. I slept 3 or 4 hours a night. Sometimes I thought I was going crazy from sleep deprivation. But I saw the goal. I saw my parents' eyes when I called them and said I got another A. I felt their pride through the phone line. And that gave me strength. My thesis defense was brilliant. My project on anomaly detection in network traffic received high praise. One of the invited experts, a man in an expensive suit representing a company called Secura Tech Solutions, even approached me afterwards. "Mr. Thompson," he said, handing me his business card, "you have a bright mind. If you decide to look for a job, give me a call. We specialize in corporate security, and we need guys like you." I thought it was just politeness. But a month later, when I graduated with honors, I called. And I was invited for an interview. Graduation day. I remember it down to the smallest details. Mom was in her best dress, dark blue, the one she saved for special occasions. She was smiling, but her eyes were glistening with tears. Dad had put on a tie that I'd probably seen him wear maybe 3 times in his life. He was awkward in it, constantly adjusting it and fidgeting with it in his hands. When they called my name and I walked onto the stage, I heard him whistle. Just whistle, the way you'd hail a cab or cheer for a friend at a stadium. Mom tugged at his sleeve, but he just smiled wider. After the ceremony, we stood on the lawn in front of the college. Dad hugged me so tight my bones creaked. "Good job, Mikey," he said, his voice slightly shaky. "I knew you could do it. You're a fighter, you are. Everything's gonna be good for you now." "Thanks, Dad," I answered, feeling a lump in my throat. Then there was Mrs. Blackwood. I ran over to her the next morning to share the news. She was sitting in her armchair by the window, wrapped in a blanket, drinking tea. "I knew it," she said simply when I showed her my diploma. I never doubted it for a minute. "And now, Michael, I want to ask you for something." "Anything. You won't need to come to me in the mornings anymore. Your life is truly beginning now. You need to build your career. But if you ever have a free moment, maybe you could stop by sometimes just for a visit? For a cup of tea? It would mean a lot to me." I promised. And I kept that promise. Secura Tech. An office in the city center, high ceilings, glass partitions, people in expensive shirts speaking a language of corporate abbreviations I didn't yet understand. I was hired into the penetration testing department. Sounds cool, right? In reality, look for holes in clients' systems before the hackers find them. At first, it was tough. Theory is one thing, but real-world practice in an actual company is something else entirely. But I soaked up knowledge like a sponge. I stayed after work, read documentation, studied others' reports. My immediate boss, Tony, a heavy-set older guy with wires perpetually sticking out of his pockets, once said, "Michael, you're like a bulldozer. Slow, but once you start, you can't be stopped." I like that. After a year, I was transferred to the analytics department. After 2, I got a raise. After 3, I was leading small projects myself. I was making good money. For the first time in my life, I could afford not to count every penny. The first thing I did was buy my mom a new washing machine. The old one, about 20 years old, constantly leaked and rattled so loudly the neighbors banged on the radiators. Mom, when she saw it, threw up her hands. "Michael, why? This must have cost a fortune." "Mom, it's from my job. You deserve it." Then I helped my dad with his car. His old pickup, which he used to drive to the warehouse, was finally falling apart. I found him a good, used Ford in perfect condition. He made excuses for a long time, said he could manage on his own. But when I drove the car up to the house, he walked around it 3 times, stroked the hood, and said, "She's a beauty." And I saw in his eyes the same pride I remembered from childhood. Only now, he was proud of me. I rented a small apartment not far from the office. On weekends, I'd drive to see my parents. We'd sit in the kitchen. Mom would bake her famous apple pie. Dad would tell stupid stories from the warehouse, and I felt happy. Truly, deeply, bone-deep happy. I thought it would always be this way. That I'd made it, that the hard part was over, that now it was only forward and upward. I didn't forget Mrs. Blackwood either. I'd stop by every couple of weeks. We'd have tea, I'd fix a socket for her or a leaky kitchen faucet. She had noticeably declined over the years, but her spirit remained unbreakable. She always asked about work, my parents, my plans. "You've built yourself a good life, Michael," she said on one of my last visits. "Treasure it, but never forget where you came from. It's your anchor." Everything collapsed on a Tuesday. An ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday. It was my 4th year at Secura Tech. I was sitting in the office, finishing a report on a project when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, a local landline. "Mr. Thompson?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Springfield General Hospital calling. Your father, James Thompson, was brought here this morning. His condition is listed as serious. You need to come as soon as possible." I don't remember what I answered. I think I just hung up. There was a rushing sound in my ears, like someone had shoved a working vacuum cleaner into my head. "Dad? Serious?" Mom had called me 3 days ago, said everything was fine, that Dad was just a bit tired from work, but it was just his age. I jumped up, dialed Mom. Her phone was off. I called again and again, nothing. I went to Tony. He was sitting in his corner cubicle, drinking coffee, staring at some charts. "Tony," I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it wasn't mine. "I need to leave urgently. My dad's in the hospital. It's bad." Tony looked at me. He was a simple guy, no sentimentality, but something human flickered in his eyes. "Mike, damn. Of course, go. How long do you need? A day, 2? We'll figure it out. I don't know. Thanks. I'll call." I grabbed my jacket, my car keys, and flew out of the office. The whole drive to Springfield, almost 4 hours, I drove like a maniac, praying to every god I didn't know to make it in time. Stupid thoughts ran through my head. That I hadn't finished reading him that book about the war we were discussing, that he never did repaint that fence, that we hadn't finished that beer in the garage last time. The hospital hid me with the smell of bleach, institutional gloom, and silence. I found the right ward, walked down a long corridor past beds with sick old people. I saw my mother immediately. She was sitting on a plastic chair by the door to a room. I barely recognized her. It had only been 3 weeks since I'd last seen her. She looked like she'd aged 10 years. Her face was gaunt, gray, with dark shadows under her eyes, and her hair had turned gray. A whole streak at her temple that wasn't there before. Her eyes were empty, fixed, like someone who'd been staring at one spot for too long. "Mom," I approached, knelt down in front of her. She slowly turned her gaze to me. It took her a few seconds to focus. "Mikey," she whispered. "Son, you came." She threw her thin, trembling arms around my neck. She wasn't crying. There were no tears left. Just a dry, exhausting emptiness. "What happened, Mom? Why didn't you call me sooner?" "We didn't want to," she began, her voice breaking. "We didn't want to bother you. You're working, you have your career. We thought it would pass. Thought it was just fatigue. But it turned out. Turned out what, Mom? What's wrong with Dad?" She looked up at me. There was so much pain in her eyes it made me physically ill. "Cancer, Mikey. Final stage. Pancreatic. They found out too late. The doctors say, only a matter of days." The world around me tilted. My mother's words burned into my brain like red-hot needles. Cancer. Final stage. A matter of days. Those words couldn't apply to my father. To my strong, big, loud father who could fix anything, who carried me on his shoulders, who whistled at my graduation. "I want to see him," I said. Mom nodded and, leaning on my arm, stood up. We entered the room. It was a standard 4-bedroom, but the other beds were empty. Only one, by the window. I walked over. It wasn't my father. In front of me on the bed lay a stranger, an unfamiliar old man. He was terribly thin, skin stretched over his cheekbones, his nose sharpened, his hands, which had always been so strong, now looked like birds' claws, tangled with IV tubes. He lay on his back, staring vacantly at the white ceiling, breathing quietly, barely audibly. "Dad," I called softly. "Dad, it's me, Michael. I'm here." His gaze slowly moved from the ceiling to me. He looked at my face, and in his eyes, there was nothing. No recognition, no joy, no pain. Just an empty, indifferent stare, like a doll's. A second later, he was staring at the ceiling again. I sat down on the chair next to him. My legs wouldn't hold me anymore. I looked at him, at this stranger, and felt something inside me snap, falling into a black, cold abyss. Mother quietly sat on the other chair and took my hand. We sat like that, probably an hour, just looking at him. Then we went home. The house was empty, dusty, and cold, even though it was a warm May outside. On the kitchen table sat an open jar of instant coffee and Dad's mug, the one he'd used for probably 20 years. White, with a chipped handle he never got around to gluing back on. Finally, Mom told me everything. It turned out the first symptoms appeared 6 months ago. Dad complained of back pain, thought he'd pulled something at work. Then digestion problems started. He lost weight, but blamed it on stress. He didn't want to see a doctor, said it would pass, that doctors just take your money. Mom begged him, but he was stubborn as a mule. When it finally got so bad he couldn't get out of bed, the ambulance took him straight away. And at the hospital, they gave the verdict. And told her to prepare for the worst. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked again, feeling anger boiling inside me. At them, at myself, at this whole damn world. I would have come sooner. I would have helped. I would have. "Michael," Mom placed her thin hand on mine. "Your father forbade it. He said you were just getting on your feet, that you had your own life, that there was no point in dragging you into this. He thought he could handle it. He always thought that. He wanted you to be proud of him, not sit by his bedside like he was a helpless old man." "Nonsense," I breathed out, my voice treacherously shaky with tears. "What the hell does pride have to do with it? He's my father." We sat in the kitchen until late at night, remembering him. The good times, the funny times, the grumpy times, but always so dear. I looked at Mom and saw she was holding on by a thread. She didn't cry in front of me. She kept her back straight, as her generation was taught. But I saw her hands tremble when she poured the tea. 2 days later, Dad was gone. I was at the hospital when it happened. It was quiet, without struggle, without screams. He just stopped breathing. The doctor came in, looked at the monitors, shook his head, and said, "I'm very sorry, Mr. Thompson." Time of death, 2:23 p.m. Mom stood beside me, holding my arm so tightly her nails dug into my skin. She didn't make a sound. Just stared at his face, which had suddenly become calm, relaxed, and even familiar features began to emerge from the mask of illness. Now he looked like himself again, like the one who smiled at me from family photos. The funeral was hard. Neighbors came, his friends from the warehouse, some distant relatives. Mom held up well, handled the memorial, received condolences. I could see she was on autopilot, that inside she was hollow. I stayed at her house, the family home. I said I'd stay a week, help with things, with paperwork. I called Tony at the office, told him Dad was buried, I needed another week. Tony sighed heavily, said, "Hang in there, Mike. Take as much time as you need. We've got you covered." I thought the worst was over. That the pain of losing my father was the hardest trial that could have befallen me. I was wrong. Life was preparing a second blow, and it hit me right in the solar plexus, knocking all the air out of my lungs. A week passed since the funeral. I was going through Dad's things in the garage. Old tools, spare parts, bits of metal he'd collected for years. Mom was in the house, trying to make lunch, but she couldn't. She'd just stand in the middle of the kitchen and stare at the wall. My mobile rang. The number was the office, the receptionist. "Michael, hi, it's Julie from the front desk. Can you come in tomorrow? Mr. Henderson, our CFO, asked to see you. He said it's important." Strange. Henderson never called me personally. Tony handled all operational matters. I felt a chill. A cold shiver ran down my spine. "What's it about, Julie? Is Tony aware?" "I don't know, Michael. He just said to tell you to come in. Tomorrow at 10. I came. The office greeted me with the usual hum of air conditioners and keyboard clicks. But the atmosphere, it was tense. People weren't smiling, they were talking quietly, huddling by the water coolers. I went into Henderson's office. Tony was sitting there too, in the corner, with a stony face. Henderson, a thin man in a perfectly fitted suit, gestured for me to sit. "Michael," he began without preamble. "Thanks for coming. We had to give you some unpleasant news. The company's in a difficult financial situation. The IT security market is saturated right now. Our segment of services, unfortunately, is becoming unviable. We've done an audit and have to proceed with staff optimization." I listened in disbelief. Staff optimization, a euphemism everyone knows. It means layoffs. Specifically, Henderson continued, looking somewhere at the table to avoid my eyes. "Your department. We've decided to disband it as unprofitable. We've offered Tony a different position, a demotion, but for you, Michael, unfortunately, there are no openings. You're an excellent specialist, really excellent. But business is business." I thought I'd misheard. I looked at Tony. Tony was staring at the floor, fidgeting with a piece of paper. "Wait," I said, feeling icy rage boil inside me. "You're firing me? Now? My father died a week ago. I just buried him. Couldn't you have waited? Michael, we're very sorry, truly." Henderson finally looked up. There was nothing in his eyes but perfunctory regret. "The decision was made by the board of directors. The list is finalized. You'll receive severance pay for 2 months. That's all we can do." 2 months? I laughed bitterly. I worked here for 4 years. 4 years. I carried projects when others slacked off. I never missed a single deadline. And this is it? Just, thanks, goodbye. Tony looked up and said quietly, "Mike, I tried. But they..." "Shut up, Tony," Henderson cut him off. "Don't make this harder." I stood up. My knees were shaking, but I didn't want to show weakness. "Keep your severance pay," I said as calmly as I could. "And tell the board of directors that I don't even know what they are. I hope their children never know what it's like to lose a father and a job in the same week." I walked out of the office, through the whole floor, feeling dozens of eyes on me. No one approached, no one said anything. In the elevator, I leaned my forehead against the cold metal wall and allowed myself 1 minute of weakness. I just stood there, staring at one spot, trying to process the information. I'd been thrown out, like garbage, at the worst possible moment in my life. I sat in my car for half an hour, staring blankly through the windshield. My phone vibrated. "Mom." I declined the call. I couldn't talk right then. I couldn't tell her that her son, her pride, her successful IT boy, was now unemployed. That the beautiful life I'd built brick by brick had crumbled to dust. I returned to my mother's house. By then, I already knew I couldn't leave her. She was broken by grief, and the thought of her being alone in that empty house, where every object reminded her of Dad, was unbearable. I got my things from my city apartment, handed back the keys, and moved into my old room, where posters of rock bands I'd listened to in school still hung on the walls. The first few weeks, I just existed. Sent out resumes, went to interviews. But the market, as Henderson had said, was indeed saturated, or I was just unlucky. The answers were standard. "We chose another candidate, your experience is impressive, but..." The severance money was disappearing at an alarming rate. I had to pay utilities, buy groceries, get medicine for Mom, who had collapsed with high blood pressure after Dad's death. One evening, I was sitting on the porch, staring blankly at the sunset, when an old pickup truck pulled up to the house. Out stepped my childhood friend, Tommy. Tommy Ryan. We'd been friends since first grade, climbed on construction sites, scraped our knees, went fishing together in the pond. He hadn't gone to college after high school, started working right away, got married, divorced, and now, as I knew from Mom, was working in a construction crew. "Mikey," he yelled, slamming the pickup door. "Damn, old man, your mom called me, said you were here. I hadn't heard about Uncle James. My condolences, man, he was a solid guy." He hugged me, clapped me on the back. "How are you doing?" "Getting by, Tommy," I smiled wryly, feeling a little warmer from his simple, straightforward manner. "Hanging in there. Heard you got laid off from work too?" He drew his thumb across his throat. "Yeah, all at once. Bastards," Tommy stated, sitting down next to me on the step and pulling out a crumpled pack of cigarettes. "Want one?" I shook my head. He lit up himself. "Listen, Mike, that's why I came. My old man, he's a foreman on a crew now. They're building a huge residential complex on the north side of town. They're short on people. Pays not like your IT, of course, but it's decent money. If you need work while you're looking for something in your field, come on over. You've got arms and legs, we'll teach you. Sitting around doing nothing'll just make you more depressed." I looked at Tommy, at his weathered face, his calloused hands, his old but well-kept truck. He was a simple laborer, but he was free. He didn't owe anyone anything, and no one could just throw him out on the street. "You think I can handle it?" I asked. "I haven't lifted anything heavier than a mouse for years." "You'll handle it," Tommy grinned. "You were always stubborn. Remember how you'd work on an algebra problem in school until you cracked it? Same thing here, just different muscles. So, wanna give it a try?" I looked at the dark windows of the house, where Mom was probably awake again. At the empty yard where Dad's old pickup no longer stood. At the sky slowly filling with clouds. "Yeah, Tommy, let's give it a try. And here it is, my new life. I get up at 5 in the morning. Not because I have to run to Mrs. Blackwood's, but because the train to the construction site runs once an hour, and if I'm late, Tommy will kill me. And the foreman, his father, Uncle Mike, funny, the namesake, doesn't like lateness either. He doesn't like people standing around at all. On the site, I'm a general laborer. That means I do whatever I'm told. Haul cement bags, pass bricks, clean up debris, help the concrete pourers when needed. The first 2 weeks, I thought I'd die. My arms shook, my back ached so much I couldn't straighten up, bloody blisters appeared on my palms every day that I had to cover with bandages. Tommy would laugh, tease me, but when things got tough, he'd lend a shoulder. "Don't give up, Mikey," he'd say, handing me a water bottle. "You'll get used to it. The body's a resilient thing. You'll see, in a month you'll be hauling bags like me, one-handed." I didn't want to haul bags one-handed. I wanted to go back to my air-conditioned office, my algorithms and security systems. But reality was this. Demand in my field was down right now, and on the construction site, they paid daily or weekly, and that money kept my mom and me from starving. Mom slowly started coming around. She began cooking, cleaning, even smiling sometimes. We'd sit in the kitchen evenings, drink tea, and talk. About everything except Dad and my job. About the past, my childhood, the neighbors. Those conversations were like balm. We were learning to live again, just the two of us, in a house that had suddenly become too big and too quiet. Evenings, I'd collapse from exhaustion. Sometimes I'd sit down at my old laptop, which I'd brought from the city, open some code, try to read professional forums. But my eyes would droop, my thoughts would get jumbled. My hands, smelling of cement and machine oil, wouldn't obey, typing with errors. I'd close the laptop and just lie on my bed, staring at the ceiling. Like Dad did then, but at least I knew who I was and where I was. Once, during the lunch break, I was sitting on a pile of lumber, eating a sandwich Mom had packed. Tommy sat next to me, telling stories. The sun was in my eyes, the construction site hummed, smelling of wood and concrete. And suddenly, it hit me. I remembered graduation day, Dad's proud eyes, his awkward tie. I remembered my first day at Secura Tech, the brand new laptop, the smell of the new office. I remembered Mrs. Blackwood, her porcelain cup, her words about me not taking the easy path. And then I looked at myself. At my dirty work jacket, my scuffed boots, my cement-covered hands. At Tommy beside me, laughing at someone's joke. And I suddenly thought, what had really changed? Yes, the world had turned upside down. Yes, I'd lost my father and my job. But I hadn't lost myself. I still got up at 5 in the morning. I still did what I had to do, even if it wasn't joyful. I still took care of my mom. I was still the same Michael Thompson who didn't take the easy path. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of hope remained. This wasn't forever. I hadn't given up on IT. I was just taking a pause. The harshest, most unexpected pause of my life. I'd come home in the evenings, read, study. Maybe in a month, in 6 months, but I'd be back. I'd sit at a computer again, and my hands, scarred from cement, would tap out code as confidently as before. But for now, there was the construction site. There was Mom. There was Tommy. There was the memory of my father, which would always be with me now. And there was this strange feeling that I'd become stronger. That life, even when it hits you hard, can't break you if you remember who you really are. I finished my sandwich, got up from the lumber pile, and brushed off my pants. All right, Tommy, I said. Work's not going to do itself. Show me where to take these bags. Tommy grinned, clapped me on the shoulder. That's my Mikey. Let's go. Uncle Mike's already yelling that we're slacking off. I followed him, feeling the solid, uneven ground under my feet. The sun beat down on the back of my neck, the construction site hummed, and in that hum, in that smell of sweat and concrete, there was its own harsh, but honest truth. A truth that, I guess, I needed to learn. And now I knew it. Life doesn't end when the light goes out. You just learn to see in the dark.